have felt my own throat open. I've burned, I've drowned, I've fallen from a rooftop and died in a stranger's arms on a wet street at 11:52 at night, 411 times. And every time I wake at 6:47 the same morning, in the same bed, the same Tuesday, and no one alive remembers it but me. I was nothing. A broke rideshare driver, $70 to my name, a dispatcher who laughed when I begged for a shift. Then I picked up the wrong passenger on a Tuesday that would not end. By midnight, I was dead. At 6:47, I was awake. That is the loop: die, wake, repeat. And here is the part that nearly broke me. The only way to try the day again is to die again, and I feel every single one like the first. It took 1,000 deaths to learn the truth. The man who really owns this city has been living this exact day for 30 years, reliving it, ruling from inside it, killing me before I can remember. And I am the first soul in 3 decades to wake up in his perfect day and remember it too. A day is a room with 2 doors. He bolted the far one shut to stay king forever. I've died 400 times reaching for the handle. Tonight, I open it. If a man clawing to the truth one death at a time is worth your evening, subscribe. I tell these from the bottom, and there is no bottom lower than a grave you climb out of every morning. But the first time I woke at 6:47, with blood still in my mouth, I thought I'd lost my mind. Let me start there. My name is Nate. The alarm went off at 6:47 that Tuesday. The way it went off every day. A cheap ascending chime on a cracked phone I couldn't afford to replace, and I lay there in the gray light of a studio apartment that smelled like the radiator and did the same math I did every morning. $71 in checking. Rent 9 days late. Gas tank at a quarter. If I ran the car 16 hours, I might clear 90 after fuel, and 90 would not cover the 400 I owed my landlord, a man named Petrov, who had stopped believing my promises around the same time I had. I want you to understand how ordinary I was because it matters later. I was not chosen. I was not special. I was 28 years old, 3 years out of a degree that turned out to be worth exactly nothing, driving a 9-year-old sedan for a black car fleet that took 40% and gave me the runs nobody else wanted. I had a name that nobody used and a face people forgot in elevators, and a life so small you could have fit the whole of it in the trunk of that car, which is more or less where it lived. The Tuesday started the way it always started. I know that now with a precision that would drive a saner man insane, because I have lived that same Tuesday more times than you have lived any day of your life. But that first time I lived it forward, blind, like a man walking off a cliff in the dark. At 6:47 the alarm. At 6:52 the text from Lena. Lena was my ex. 2 years, ended 8 months ago, ended because I could not afford the version of a life she wanted, and she found a man who could. The text was not cruel. That was the thing about Lena, she was never cruel. She was just done, and done is worse than cruel, because you cannot argue with it. She was texting to say she was getting engaged, and she wanted me to hear it from her, and not from someone else, and she hoped I was doing well. I read it standing at the counter with instant coffee going cold in my hand, and I typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them, and sent back a thumbs up, because a thumbs up is what you send when you have nothing left in the tank. And I had been running on empty for a long time. At 7:30 I logged into the Fleet app and requested the airport board, the only runs that paid enough to matter, and at 7:34 the dispatcher, a heavyset man named Doyle, who ran the night desk like a man handing out favors he enjoyed withholding, sent back the same message he sent me most mornings. Airport board's full. Take what's on the street. And when I called to push, because I was desperate enough to push, he laughed, a short, wet laugh, and told me that guys who wanted the good runs showed up as guys the fleet wanted to keep, and that I was neither, and he hung up. So I took what was on the street. I drove 16 hours through a cold, bright Tuesday, and I made the kind of money you make, taking what's on the street, $4 rides and $11 rides and one good $16 run to the medical center, and I ate a gas station sandwich at 2 and nothing after that, and by 11, at night, I had cleared $68 against a quarter tank of gas, and a body that felt like it had been folded into that seat since birth. That is where the ordinary part ends. 11 o'clock at night, on the far east side, in the warehouse district, down by the river where the streetlights give out and the app pings go quiet, is where my real life started. though it would take me a long time and a lot of dying to understand that. The ping came at 11:41. A pickup, close, 3 blocks in a part of the district where nobody requests a car at 11 at night because there is nothing down there but shuttered loading docks and the black river beyond them. I almost declined it. I have thought about that a great deal since. The version of me that declined that ride. The version that is presumably still out there somewhere living a small, forgettable life, and I do not know whether to envy him or pity him. But I was $68 into a $90 hole, and a fare was a fare, so I took it. She was standing under the one working light on a dead street, and she was scared. I have picked that woman up more times than I can count now, and she is scared every single time, and it still does something to me, watching her walk toward the car, with that particular fast, tight walk of a person who thinks they are being followed, and is trying very hard to look like they are not. She was young, maybe my age, dark coat, a canvas bag held against her body with both arms the way you hold something that matters more than a bag should. She got in the back and told me an address on the other side of the city, and then she said quietly, "Please just drive, please," and she looked out the back window, and I pulled out. Her name was Cora. I did not know it that night. That night she was just a scared woman in the back of my car at 11 at night, and I did what you do, I drove, and I watched her in the mirror, and I asked if she was okay, and she said she was fine in the voice people use when they are the opposite of fine. We got 4 blocks. At the corner of Halsted and the River Road, a car came out of a side street without lights and stopped across the road in front of us, angled, blocking both lanes. The way a car only stops when stopping you is the entire point. I hit the brakes. Cora made a sound in the back seat that I have heard 400 times since and have never gotten used to, a small broken inhale, the sound of someone whose worst fear has just walked out of the dark and become real. A man got out of the other car. His name, though it would be 100 deaths before I learned it, was Renner. I could not see his face, only that he was unhurried, that he crossed the road toward us at a walk, a big man in a dark coat, and that there was something in his hand held down along his leg. Cora was saying, "Drive, drive, go, back up," and I threw it into reverse in the car behind us that I had not seen boxed us in, and I understand now, with the clarity of a man who has watched this exact ballet unfold hundreds of times, that we had never had a chance, that the whole thing was a machine and we had driven into it. But that night, I only knew that a man was walking toward my car in the dark, and that the woman in my back seat was going to die, and that I was in between. He came to my window. He tapped it with the thing in his hand, which was a gun, and he waited, patient, and I did the stupidest and most human thing. I did not open it. I put the car in gear and stood on the gas and tried to drive over the curb around the car in front of us. The window came apart. I don't remember the sound. There is a mercy in it, that the mind does not keep the sound of the shot that kills you, and I have tested that mercy many times since, and it holds. What I remember is the cold, the sudden impossible cold, flooding up through my chest, and the way the streetlight smeared across the cracked windshield, and Cora's voice, far away now, and then not even that. I remember thinking, with the last coherent thought I had, that I had $68 in 9 days, and now I would not have to worry about any of it. And there was something almost like relief in that, and I have never forgiven myself for it. I died at 11:52 p.m. on a wet street on the east side in a 9-year-old car with a stranger screaming in the back seat over something I did not understand, for reasons I would spend 1,000 lifetimes uncovering. And then the alarm went off at 6:47 in the morning. I came up out of it like a man surfacing from deep water, gasping, my hand going to my chest where the cold had come in, and there was nothing there, no wound, no blood, no hole, just my own heart slamming against my ribs in the gray light of a studio apartment that smelled like the radiator. The cheap ascending chime. The cracked phone. 6:47 a.m. I lay there for a long time. I told myself the things a person tells himself. A nightmare. A hallucination. A stress dream so vivid it had color and cold and a woman's voice in it, brought on by 16-hour days and gas station food and a text from Lena that I was sure, now in the light, I had dreamed too. Then the phone buzzed. 6:52. A text from Lena. She was getting engaged, and she wanted me to hear it from her, and not someone else. and she hoped I was doing well. Word for word. I read it 3 times. The exact same words, the same soft, careful sentences, arriving at the same minute, on a morning I had already lived to its bloody end. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it was not heroic, and it was not clever. I panicked. I called Lena, and she didn't pick up because it was 7 in the morning. I called my landlord, and he told me to stop calling and pay him. I sat on the edge of my bed shaking, and told myself I was losing my mind, that this was a breakdown, that the human brain does strange things when a body is starved and worked and heartbroken all at once, and I almost believed it right up until 7:34, when I logged into the Fleet app on a hunch that felt like madness and requested the airport board, and Doyle sent back, before I had even finished. Airport board's full. Take what's on the street. The same words. The same minute. A man I had spoken to yesterday and watched hang up on me answering a call he did not remember, in a day he did not know he was repeating. That was when the fear turned into something worse than fear, which is understanding. I did not take what was on the street. I sat in my apartment with the door locked, and I did not drive, and I did not go anywhere near the east side or the river, or a scared woman with a canvas bag, because whatever had happened down there in the dark, I was not going back to it. I would break the pattern. I would sit in this room until this cursed Tuesday was over, and it became Wednesday, and the world started making sense again. I made it to 11:52 p.m. I was sitting on my bed, fully dressed, watching the clock on the cracked phone with my back against the wall, and at 11:52 exactly, the radiator in my apartment, the old radiator that had smelled up my whole life, gave a bang like a gunshot, and a seam in the ancient gas line behind it let go, and I did not even have time to stand up before the room came apart in heat and light. I died at 11:52 p.m. in my own locked room, miles from the river, from Cora, from the man with the gun, on the far side of the city, having touched none of it. And the alarm went off at 6:47 in the morning. I came up gasping in the gray light with my hand on a chest that was whole, and I understood, finally, completely, the way you understand a thing in your body before your mind will say it out loud. It did not matter where I went. It did not matter what I did or didn't do. The day did not care. The day had decided that Nate the nobody died before midnight, and the day would find a way, a gun or a gas line or something I hadn't met yet, and when it did, I would open my eyes at 6:47 and do it all again. I was in a loop. Only I remembered. And the only door out of the day I could find was the one I had already walked through twice, which was my own death, arriving on schedule, every night, whether I earned it or not. Most men would have prayed. Some would have gone mad, and I think, in the loops right after that second morning, I did go a little mad, in ways I will tell you about when I have the stomach for it. But underneath the terror, on that third morning, lying in the gray light with the taste of the gas fire still in my mouth, a different thing was already stirring, small and cold and mine. Because I had lived this Tuesday 3 times now. I knew Lena's text before it came. I knew Doyle's words before he said them. I knew, to the minute, when the radiator would kill me. A day that repeats is a day you can learn. And a man who can learn a day, who can walk it blind 1,000 times and remember every step, is not a nobody anymore. No matter what Doyle thinks, no matter what Lena chose, no matter how many dollars are in his account. I did not know yet who Cora was, or who killed us, or why a broke driver and a scared stranger were worth a machine in the dark. I did not know that somewhere in this same repeating Tuesday, another man was awake and remembering. A man who had been awake and remembering for 30 years, and that I had just, by dying twice, taken my first small step onto his board. All I knew that third morning was that the day was a cage, and a cage you have measured, corner to corner, in the dark, is just a room you have not finished escaping yet. I got up. I made the cold instant coffee. And when the phone buzzed at 6:52 with Lena's engagement, I did not read it, because I already knew every word, and I had, for the first time in my small forgotten life, something better to do with a Tuesday than grieve. I had a day to learn. If you have ever wanted to know what a man does when he is handed infinite tries at a single day, I will tell you the ugly truth. He does not save the world. Not at first. At first he robs it. I spent the next stretch of loops, and I do not know how many, because I had not yet learned to count them, turning that Tuesday inside out like a pocket. A day you can repeat is the greatest cheat that has ever existed, and I was a broke man who had been told no his whole life. And the first thing I did with the power of a god was use it to stop being poor. It was almost too easy, and the ease of it should have warned me. I learned the day the way you learn a song. At 8 a man in a gray coat dropped a money clip at the coffee cart on 9th and did not notice for 2 blocks. I could be there at 8:11 and hand it back, and he would every time press 2 20s into my hand out of gratitude and relief. At 9:25, a delivery truck ran the light at Kessler and Vine, always, and clipped a taxi. And if you knew it was coming, you could be in the right lane instead of the wrong one. Or you could be standing on the corner as a witness who happened to have his phone out. There was a horse, a long shot in the 4th at the Downs, that came in every single time I lived that Tuesday. And once I had $40 to put on it, I never had $40 of worry again. I learned the market. There was a biotech ticker that jumped 19% at 10:02 on the news of a trial result. Every loop, reliable as sunrise. And once I understood that the same 19% was waiting for me every morning, I stopped being a man who drove 16 hours for $68 and became a man who made more before lunch than Doyle cleared in a month. I could not keep the money, of course. That was the cruelty and the mercy of it both. Every 6:47, the account reset to $71, and the horse unran and the biotech unjumped, and I started over. But I could learn what money teaches, and I could walk into that Tuesday over and over with the calm of a man who knew exactly how much everything cost, and there is a kind of wealth in that which does not reset. I used it on the people who had made me small, because I was still small enough to want to. I let Doyle deny me the airport board a dozen mornings, just so I could learn the shape of him. And then one loop I called the desk, and before he could say airport board's full, I told him it was full. Told him he was about to send it to a driver named Marchetti who would no-show the second run. Told him the exact fare that was about to come in on the medical line and the exact tip on it. And I listened to a man who had laughed at me every morning of my life go silent, and then careful, and then, for the first time, respectful. Because there is no one on earth a bully fears like a man who seems to know things he shouldn't. It was a small and stupid pleasure. I am not proud of how much I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it enormously. I answered Lena's text 100 different ways across 100 mornings, which is a thing I have never told anyone. I sent the bitter version and the gracious version, and the version that made her cry, and the version that won her back, and the version where I told her the truth that I had loved her more than I had ever loved the small life I could give her, and none of it mattered, because at 6:47, the text unsent itself, and she was engaged again, and I had learned, the hard way, over and over, that you cannot fix a grief by rehearsing it. Some of the loops I just sent the thumbs up. By the end, I understood that the thumbs up had been the right answer all along, that there had never been anything to say, and that is the first real thing the day taught me, though I would not have called it wisdom then. I would have called it giving up. I got good at the Tuesday. I got so good that I could move through it like a dancer who has run the same routine 10,000 times, knowing every mark, every cue, every place a stranger would step so I could step around them. I knew which barista was having the worst day of her life, and which cop would ticket a double park, and which intersection ate a pedestrian at 4:50 if no one shouted. For a while, God help me, I was happy. I had been nothing, and now I was the only man in the city who knew the future, and the future was only 24 hours long, but it was mine, corner to corner, and I owned it. Somewhere in there, and I could not tell you which loop, I started using the day on people who could not pay me back, and that changed something in me that the money never did. There was a diner on Pruitt Street where I stopped most nights, a narrow, greasy place run by an old cook named Sal who worked the grill alone and talked to no one, and one loop, out of boredom, I paid attention to him instead of my phone, and I learned that at 10:40, every night Sal got a call from a hospital about his wife, and that every night the call was bad, and that he took it standing at the grill with his back to the room, so no would Zuwon see his face. I could not fix it. I tried a few loops, in the clumsy ways you try, and you cannot cure a dying woman inside a single Tuesday. But I learned that if I sat at the counter and ordered the meatloaf and asked him at 10 before the call to tell me about her, he would. And his face while he talked about a girl he'd met at a dance 40 years ago was the only warm thing in that whole cold repeating day, and I started ordering the meatloaf every loop just to give an old man 5 minutes of remembering for happy before the phone rang. He never knew me. Every night I was a stranger. But I knew him, and there is a strange private tenderness in knowing a man's whole grief, while he thinks he's serving meatloaf to a nobody, and it was, I think now, the first time in that entire Tuesday that I did a thing the loop could not reset, because kindness given to a man who won't remember it still happened. It still happened. I have held on to that harder than I have held on to anything. I got good at the Tuesday. I got so good that I could move through it like a dancer who has run the same routine 10,000 times, knowing every mark, every cue, every place a stranger would step so I could step around them. I knew which barista was having the worst day of her life, a girl named Priya who found out at 11 a.m. that she hadn't gotten into the program she'd bet everything on, and I learned that if I told her casually that I'd heard they sent a second round of acceptances in the afternoon, she'd get through her shift without crying in the walk-in, and it wasn't even a lie. Not every loop, because some loops the second email really did come and I got to watch her whole face change. I knew which cop would ticket a double park and which intersection ate a pedestrian at 4:50 if no one shouted. For a while, God help me, I was happy. I had been nothing, and now I was the only man in the city who knew the future. And the future was only 24 hours long, but it was mine, corner to corner, and I owned it. Except for the ending. I could not, no matter what I did, own the ending. Because every loop, every single one, no matter how I spent the day, no matter how rich or clever or careful I was, I died before midnight. It took me an embarrassingly long time to see the pattern in it, because I was so busy learning to win the day that I did not notice the day would not let me finish it. The deaths were different every time. A hit and run on a crosswalk I had crossed safely a dozen times before. A mugging in a stairwell that had always been empty. A bad oyster, once absurdly, that closed my throat in a restaurant I had treated myself to, with money that would vanish at dawn. I told myself it was the loop's cruelty, its way of resetting me, that the day simply required my death, the way a machine requires a switch thrown, and any death would do. But then I started keeping track of the time. And the deaths, however they came, however far I ran from the river and the warehouse district, and the memory of a scared woman in my back seat, all of them, everyone, arrived in the same narrow window. Never before 11:40. Never after 11:55. It did not matter if I was in a penthouse restaurant on the west side that I had bought my way into with the biotech money, or hiding in a movie theater across town, or locked in my own apartment with the gas shut off at the main. Somewhere in those 15 minutes on either side of a quarter to midnight, the day reached out and found me and killed me and set me back to 6:47. A random reset does not have a schedule. A random reset does not care where you are or wait for a particular quarter hour. The day was not resetting me because it needed to. Something was killing me because it wanted to, and it wanted to at a very specific time, and it never, ever missed. There was one loop that took the last of my doubt away. I decided to disappear. I had money from the market by mid-morning, real money, for a few more hours, and I used it to vanish the way a careful man vanishes. No phone, no cards after noon, a cash room in a chain hotel on the west side under a name that wasn't mine, 40 floors up, door chained, curtains, television off. Sitting in the dark on a Tuesday, in a room no one on earth knew I was in. I had beaten it. There was no way, no possible way for an accident to find a man in a sealed room it could not know existed. I watched the clock on the nightstand climb toward midnight, and I let myself believe, for 11 minutes past the danger, that I had finally reached Wednesday. At 11:46, there was a knock at the door. Not a wrong room knock. Not housekeeping. 3 slow, deliberate raps from a man who knew exactly which door, on a floor I had chosen at random, in a hotel I had picked on a whim under a name I had invented an hour before. I did not open it. I stood against the far wall with my heart coming apart, and I watched the handle, and the lock, a modern electronic lock I had not touched, went green on its own, and the door opened against the chain, and through the 4-inch gap I saw, for the first time, part of a face. Calm. Unbothered. A big man in a dark coat, the same unhurried shape that had crossed a wet road toward my car 100 loops ago. And he looked through that gap at me with the mild patience of a man reading a name off an appointment book and finding it exactly where he expected it, and he said the only words that man ever said to me in all the times he killed me. There you are. Then the chain was nothing, and neither was I. The morning I understood that, I sat in the gray light and did not make the coffee, and the small cold thing that had been growing in me since the second death finally showed me its shape. I had thought I was a man who had been given a miracle. I was not. I was a man who had walked into a trap so complete that it had its own hours, and the miracle, the loop, the waking at 6:47, was not a gift at all. It was the trap resetting the bait, because you do not put a schedule on an accident. You put a schedule on an appointment. And every night, at 1:45, in a city of 9 million people who would live to see Wednesday, someone had an appointment to kill me and had kept it, without fail, for longer than I had been counting. I was not a nobody who had stumbled into a loop. I was a target. And somewhere out there in the same repeating Tuesday, patient and unhurried and always, always on time, was the man holding the appointment book. Here is the thing a hunter never expects about his prey. If you kill a man every night and he remembers every death, then every night he knows you a little better, and you do not know him at all. That was the one edge I had, and once I stopped running long enough to see it, everything changed. The man in the dark coat killed me at 1:45, every loop, wherever I hid. Fine. Then I would stop hiding. I would spend the day, the whole long, safe day before the hour of the appointment, learning the man who kept it. He had until 11:46 to find me. I had from 6:47 until then to find him first. It is a strange thing, to hunt the man who is going to kill you, knowing he will succeed, knowing the worst he can do to you is send you back to breakfast. Death had been the most frightening thing in the world to me for 28 years, and the loop had taken that away. And what it gave me instead was the one weapon a mortal man never gets. I could be reckless. I could walk straight up to the thing that scared me and study its face, because I had already felt everything it could do to me, and I had woken up anyway with the taste of it in my mouth and my heart still beating. A man who cannot die for good is a man who can afford to look. So I looked. I started at the river, because the river was where it began, the first death, the scared woman, the car across the road. I stopped being the driver in that scene and became the audience. I would take a different car, a rental paid in the biotech cash, and I would park up on the loading dock above Halstead and the River Road at 11 o'clock, and I would watch the corner where I had died, and I would learn the choreography of my own murder from the outside. It was worse from the outside. It was so precise. At 11:38, the blocking car slid into the side street with its lights off and waited. At 11, what a woman came fast down the dead street with a canvas bag held against her chest, and she stood under the one working light and ordered a car. And I watched loop after loop, the car that answered B, mine, my old sedan coming around the corner right on time, with a version of me at the wheel who did not know yet that he was driving into a machine. At 11:47, the blocking car moved. At 11:08, the man in the dark coat crossed the road. And by 11:52, the driver was dead and the woman was dead, and the two bodies were loaded into the blocking car. With the unhurried competence of men who had done this more times than they could remember, which, I would learn, was closer to the truth than I could have dreamed. The woman died at 11:47. The driver, me, at 11:52. I noted that. I did not understand it yet, but I noted it, the way you note the one detail, in a room that is a half-inch out of place, because the day had taught me that half-inch details were the whole game. She was the appointment. I was the witness who happened to be holding the door. 2 different deaths on 2 different clocks, and the earlier one, hers, was the one the whole machine was built around. So I learned her, the way I had learned Sal and Priya and Doyle, except that learning her cost more, because to learn her, I had to watch her run and be caught and killed, again and again, and there is a particular damage in memorizing a stranger's last hour on repeat. Her name was Cora. I got it, eventually, off a lanyard I saw when I reached her early enough one loop to walk beside her for a block before the cars came. She worked, of all the places in that city, for the Kessler Foundation, in the accounts office on the 19th floor of the Black Glass Tower, a junior nobody with a login and a conscience, and the canvas bag she held against her chest, like a child held a printout, of something she was never supposed to see. I did not know yet what was on the pages. I knew only that she had found it that afternoon and copied it and run, and that she had made exactly one phone call before she died, at 11:29, to a number that never picked up, and that she was trying to reach the river to meet whoever was supposed to be on the other end of that call, and that no one ever was, because the man who owned her building had made certain of it hours before she even knew she was running. She was brave. That is the thing I want on the record, before I tell you how many times I failed her. Every loop cornered, she did not beg. She held that bag and she looked the man in the dark coat in the eye, and once, one loop, when I reached her and shouted a warning and we ran together for 11 beautiful seconds before it ended for both of us, she looked at me, this stranger who knew her name she'd never given, and she did not ask how. She said thank you to a man she would never remember meeting, in the last 4 seconds of a life she did not know she'd already lived 100 times. I have died in a lot of ways in this story. That one I chose to feel all the way down, on purpose, because someone should remember it, and I was the only one who could. I learned the man in the dark coat by following him instead of waiting for him. I learned the man in the dark coat by following him instead of waiting for him. His name, I would eventually pull off a parking citation I watched him argue at 3 p.m. On the west side was Renner. He was not a monster. That was the part that unsettled me most. He was a professional, a tradesman, a man who did a difficult job well and went home to an apartment with a cat. And I know about the cat because I followed him home, a dozen loops, and watched him feed it. This man who would put a bullet through my eye in 9 hours, kneeling on his own kitchen floor, scratching a cat under the chin and murmuring to it. Evil, I was learning, does not always come with a face you can hate. Sometimes it comes with a cat and a punch in time and a boss. I learned to use the one advantage no investigator in history has ever had, which is that I could ask a question with my life and get the answer back for free at 6:47. If I needed to know what Renner did after he killed me, I let him kill me early, and I lay there in the trunk of the blocking car with my eyes half open, playing dead, which is not hard when you are most of the way there, and I listened. If I needed to know a passcode, I walked into the place I would be shot for walking into, and I read it off the panel in the 2 seconds before the shot, and then I woke up and wrote it down. I spent deaths the way I had once spent dollars, carelessly at first, and then with a miser's precision, because I had learned that a death bought a fact, and a fact was the only thing that carried across the reset. My body reset. My money reset. Cora reset, God help me, alive and scared and doomed every single dawn. But what I knew did not reset, and so I became, one corpse at a time, the best informed man in the city, a walking archive of a day that had never officially happened, and every fact I bled for pointed the same direction, up, past Renner, toward the black glass tower on the plaza. And Renner had a boss. That was the thread I pulled, patiently, over more loops than I want to admit, because Renner was careful, and I had only 24 hours at a time, and I kept, inconveniently, dying. But a day you can repeat is a day you can surveil forever, and eventually I followed the money and the meetings, and the man Renner reported to at 6 p.m. Every Tuesday in the parking structure, under a black glass tower on Kessler Plaza, and I want you to sit with that name for a second, the way I did the first time I saw it carved into the marble over the doors, because I had been driving past it my whole life. Kessler Plaza. Kessler and Vine, where the delivery truck ran the light. The Kessler Foundation, whose galas I had ferried the rich to for tips that barely covered gas. Half the good things in that city had his name on them: the children's wing, the concert hall, the scholarship that a girl like Priya might have killed for, and half the buildings that mattered, and I had never once in 28 years thought about the man behind the name. Because men like me are not supposed to. Ellis Kessler was the kind of rich that stops being a person and becomes a piece of the landscape, a name on the skyline, a face on a magazine in a dentist's office. And I, a driver who died in a 9-year-old car over a canvas bag, had just followed his private killer home to his door. I paid for that in deaths, and I want to be honest about the price, because it is easy to say I followed the thread and hard to sit in what following it cost. To learn the 6 p.m. meeting I had to be in the parking structure at 6 p.m., and the parking structure at 6 p.m. was a place Renner's people watched, and the first dozen times I got close enough to see anything, I got close enough to be seen. and being seen down there near the center of it bought me a death that came early and hard, sometimes hours before the appointment, because near the center they did not wait for a schedule. I learned the structure the way I had learned the river, one death at a time. This pillar is watched. That camera sweeps left at the quarter hour. This stairwell has a man in it after 5. I learned that if I came in on foot through the loading level, dressed like the building's own maintenance, in coveralls I stole off a laundry cart at 4 p.m. Every loop, no one looked at me twice because a man in coveralls carrying a clipboard is the closest thing to invisible that a rich building has. It took me 30 deaths to assemble an outfit and a route that let me stand 40 feet from Ellis Kessler and simply watch. And I have never resented a cost less, because what I bought with those 30 deaths was the sight of the man himself. The first time I laid eyes on the actual man, it was through the tinted glass of a car in that parking structure, and he was old, 70s, silver and elegant and utterly calm, and he listened to Renner's report with the mild attention of a man being told the weather, and then he said something I could not hear. And Renner nodded, and that was it. That was the meeting where a nobody's murder was, apparently a line item. I sat 40 feet away in a rental car with my hands shaking on the wheel, and I understood that I had climbed, death by death, all the way up a thread I was never meant to see the top of, from a scared woman on a dead street to the most powerful man in the city, and that the distance between us was not supposed to be crossable, and I had crossed it anyway. Because the one thing Ellis Kessler's money could not buy was a man who could not stay dead. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. But under the fear, that cold small thing in me that the loop had grown was doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic said this: a man that powerful does not send a professional to erase a driver and a girl over nothing. Nobodies are not worth the appointment. We were worth something, Cora and I, worth a machine and a schedule and the personal attention of a king. And whatever we were worth it to, whatever that canvas bag held, it was big enough that Ellis Kessler killed for it every single night without fail. And here is the question that changed my whole understanding of the trap I was in, the question I asked myself sitting in that parking structure, watching a billionaire order my death like a coffee. If Kessler resets to 647 same as me, if the whole world forgets same as me, then how does he remember to send Renner at all? How does a man keep an appointment on a day the world swears has never happened? The answer, when it came, was the worst thing I ever learned. He remembered because he was not resetting with the world. He was the one holding it still. I had to be sure. A thing that large, you do not believe on a hunch. So I built a test the way you test a wall you think might be a door. Everyone in that Tuesday was a recording. Play the day the same way, and they said the same words at the same minutes. Lena's text, Doyle's laugh, the barista's bad news, Sal's grief at 10:40. Push them off their marks and they improvised. But only within the small human range of a person meeting a strange morning. And then, the next dawn, the recording reset, and they remembered nothing. That was how I knew everyone in the city was a leaf on the same resetting branch. They could be surprised, but they could not learn. Tomorrow they would be surprised by the exact same thing again. Kessler was not a recording. I proved it in a parking structure with a newspaper. There was a headline that ran every loop on the second page of the city paper. A small item, a zoning approval, nothing. And I had noticed across many loops that Kessler's driver bought that paper at the same kiosk at 5:40 every evening and carried it up to the meeting. So one loop I got there first. I bought every copy. I sat on the low wall by the elevators where Kessler would pass, and I read the paper openly, that specific paper, folded to that specific page, and I waited to see if the most powerful man in the city would walk past a driver reading a newspaper and feel nothing. He stopped. Ellis Kessler, who had never once in my surveillance so much as glanced at a valet, stopped 6 feet from me in the concrete gloom and looked at the paper in my hands, and then he looked at my face, and something moved behind his eyes that I had not seen behind any other pair of eyes in that entire city. Recognition, not of me, of the wrongness of me, of a leaf that was not resetting with the branch. He looked at me the way I had learned to look at Kessler, the way you look at the one thing in a familiar room that has moved on its own. And for one long second, 2 men stood in a parking structure, understanding each other completely and saying nothing at all. Then he smiled, a small, courteous, social smile, and he said good evening, And he got in his car, and at 11:44 that night, Renner found me 8 minutes early, which he had never done, and I understood that I had just introduced myself, and that the introduction had cost me a head start I would never get back. Because Ellis Kessler remembered. Ellis Kessler had always remembered. And once I knew that, the whole shape of the trap turned inside out and showed me its true and monstrous size. The day did not repeat because of some accident that had also caught me. The day repeated because of him. He was its center and its cause. I do not fully understand the mechanism even now, and I have had more time to think about it than any man alive, but I have pieced together enough. 30 years ago, on a Tuesday, Ellis Kessler did something at 1:45 that a man cannot undo and cannot live with and cannot be forgiven, and rather than walk into the Wednesday, where that thing was true and waiting for him, he found a way, or a way found him, or he simply wanted it badly enough that the universe flinched, to keep the day from ending, to hold it, to live forever in the last morning before the consequence, in a world that reset every dawn so that the thing he had done at 11:47 was never quite real, was always about to happen and never had, on a page that tore itself out every night before anyone could read it. And a lesser man would have gone mad in a week. Kessler built a kingdom. Think about what 30 years of the same day makes you. 30 years, 10,000 Tuesdays, more, each one 24 hours long, and each one his to run again. He knew every stock tick and every scandal and every secret whispered in that city on that day, because he had heard them all 10,000 times. He knew which senator took the call and which marriage was a lie, and where every body in every closet had been buried, because he had spent a human lifetime, several human lifetimes, walking through the same afternoon, opening the same doors. He had made himself the richest man in the city, not by genius but by memory, the way I had made $90 off a biotech ticker, except he had done it for 3 decades until the $90 became a black glass tower with his name on it. He owned the police who mattered, and the judges who mattered, and the news that ran, because on a day you can repeat forever, there is no leverage you cannot find, and no favor you cannot arrange, and no enemy whose worst secret you cannot learn simply by being patient, across 1,000 identical mornings. He was not a billionaire who happened to loop. He was a loop that had learned to look like a billionaire. And I, who had been so proud of my little edge, my hundreds of Tuesdays, my archive of a single day, understood at last exactly how far out of my depth I was. I had studied this day like a diligent student cramming for one exam. He had lived in it like a native for 30 years. Every clever thing I could think to do, he had thought of and done and grown bored with before I was born. Every hiding place I could find, he had used and discarded. When I looked at Ellis Kessler, I was looking at the man I would become if I stayed in that Tuesday for 3 decades, and the sight of it frightened me more than Renner's gun ever had, because Renner only killed my body, and what Kessler had become had killed something else, something you cannot see the loss of in a mirror. That was why he killed me every night, and it was almost worse for how little it meant to him. I was not a threat. I was maintenance. A leaf that had come loose from the branch, a small wrongness in a perfect machine, and he had a man whose whole job was to walk through the day tidying up loose ends, the witness, the driver, the girl with the bag, the handful who each Tuesday brushed too close to the thing at the center, and Renner tidied us away before 11, so that Kessler's perfect morning could reset clean, unwitnessed, unremembered, one more teen, unwitnessed, unremembered, one more time, forever. Cora died every night, because she had seen the thing on the pages. I died every night because I had held the door for her. And the man who signed both our deaths had been signing them, or ones exactly like them, for longer than I had been alive, with the mild attention of a groundskeeper pulling the same weeds out of the same lawn every morning, and never once wondering why they kept coming back. He came to talk to me in the end. I had known he would, once I started surviving deeper into the day instead of dying early, once I became a wrongness that recurred instead of one he could tidy and forget. A billionaire does not go 30 years without company that remembers, and then ignore the first man in 3 decades who does. Curiosity is the last human thing to die in a man like that, and I think, though he would never have said it, that he was lonely in a way no one who has not lived a lock day can understand, and that a part of him had been waiting a very long time for someone to talk to who would still be there tomorrow, except that there was no tomorrow, so I would have to do. He sent a car. Of course he sent a car. I was a driver, it was a courtesy, and a joke at once. It took me to the top of the black glass tower, to a room of glass and warm light, with the whole glittering city laid out below like something he owned, which it was, and he poured me a drink I could not afford in my real life, and would not remember buying in the morning, and he looked at me with those calm old eyes and said so. You remember? We talked for a long time, that loop and others, because he liked talking to me, and I needed everything he would let slip, and I will not pretend I understood him at first, or that I hated him cleanly. He was charming. 30 years of the same conversations had made him the most graceful company in the world, a man who could read your next sentence off your face, because he had heard 10,000 men say it. He told me the day was not a prison. He said that was the mistake everyone made, the few who had ever brushed against the truth of it, and he had watched a handful over the decades, a nurse, a detective, a boy, each of them wake up to the loop, and each of them, he said, break against it like water on a rock. The day is not a cage, he told me, refilling my glass. The day is the only honest thing left. Out there, he said, gesturing at the dark beyond the glass, is a Wednesday, and in it every one of us gets older and gets sick and loses what he loves and answers, at the end, for what he did. In here nothing is lost, because nothing is allowed to move. Your girl downstairs, he said, and he watched my face when he said it. Your Cora with her bag. She is alive right now. She is alive every single morning. In the world you want, the world where the day ends, she is alive exactly once, and then she is gone forever. I have spared her, he said, 10,000 times. What have you done for her but watch her die? I understood, sitting there, that this was the shape of the thing that had rotted him. He had taken the worst thing about the loop, that no kindness sticks and no wound heals and no one moves on, and he had told himself it was the best thing, because a world where nothing sticks is a world where the thing he did at 11, 47 also does not stick, and he had had 30 years to make that lie beautiful. He offered me a place in it. He was sincere, which was the horror. He said I was clever than the others, that I would come around the way he had, that in a decade or two I would stop grieving Wednesday and start to love the perfect unchanging morning, and that when I did, there would be room at the top of the tower for a man who understood. Stop running the day, he said, and start living in it. There is no Bill here. There is no last time. Everyone you ever lost is downstairs right now, alive, forever, if you will only stop trying to open the door that lets the dying back in. And the terrible thing, the thing I have to confess because this story is worthless if I lie in it, is that a part of me wanted to say yes, because he was not entirely wrong. Cora was alive down there. So was a version of Lena who had not chosen someone else yet, somewhere earlier in the day. So was Sal's wife in a hospital across town, breathing every single dawn. He was offering me a world where I never had to lose anyone again, and he was offering it from a chair at the top of everything, and I was a man who had spent his whole small life losing. And for one long moment in that beautiful room, I felt the pull of it like a hand around my heart. Then I remembered the thank you. Cora, in the last 4 seconds, to a stranger she would never know, thank you. And I understood that Kessler had gotten it exactly backwards, that a life which happens exactly once and then is gone forever is not the tragedy. It is the whole of what makes a thank you mean anything, that his deathless, perfect morning had not spared Cora at all. It had trapped her. It had made her run and hide and die every night for 30 years so that he would never have to bleed, and that the kindest thing anyone could do for her was not to keep her alive forever in a cage, but to let her live one real day and reach one real Wednesday, even if she spent it grieving, even if she spent it old. I finished his drink. I told him no. He nodded, unsurprised, a man who had heard no before, and he said, gently, "You'll die tonight then, the way you always do." And I said I knew, and I did. I sat with that for a long time, across a lot of loops. And somewhere in there the fear finished burning off, the way it always does if you feed it enough facts, and left behind the cold thing, larger now, harder, that had been growing in me since the second death. Because I had just learned the true rules of the game, and the true rules were almost hopeless. Almost. There was one line in them I kept coming back to, one crack in the perfect wall, and it was this. Ellis Kessler had held a single day still for 30 years, so that he would never have to walk into tomorrow. which meant that the one thing in all the world that the most powerful man in the city was afraid of, the one thing his money and his memory and his 30 years of practice existed entirely to prevent, was the simplest thing there is. Wednesday. He was not trying to win the day. He had won the day 1,000 times over. He was trying to keep it from ending. And a man defending a locked door is a man who has told you, without meaning to, exactly which door to open. After that, the day stopped being about me. I want to be clear about how strange that was, because for most of my life the day had been about nothing but me, my rent, my tank, my grief, the small hungry arithmetic of a man trying to stay afloat. But once I understood that Cora died every night at 11:47 for the crime of seeing a truth, and that I was the only person in the world who could remember her, the whole engine of the loop reorganized itself around one question that had nothing to do with saving my own skin. How do you save a woman the most powerful man in the world has decided to kill, on a day he has run 10,000 times more than you, when she will not remember a single thing you teach her? I tried everything. I have to say that plainly, because what comes later only means anything if you know I tried everything first. I tried reaching her early. I learned her whole day, worked backward from 11:47 to the afternoon on the 19th floor when she found the pages, and I started intercepting her sooner, at the tower, at her apartment, at the coffee cart. A stranger appearing out of nowhere who knew her name and her fear. And the trouble with that was that a frightened woman does not follow a strange man who knows too much. She runs from him, and half my early attempts just got her killed in new places at new times, while she fled the one person trying to help. I learned to be gentler. I learned the exact words, tested over dozens of loops, that would make Cora trust me in the 90 seconds I had. And even then, even with her trust, Kessler was always there. That was the thing. I could change my move, but he remembered every move I had ever made. The loops where I drove her out of the city, there were roadblocks. The loops where I hid her, Renner knew the address. The loops where I put her on a train, the train did not leave. I was playing chess against a man who had seen the board 10,000 more times than me, and every opening I found, he had a book on. The loop that taught me the most about that, I had done everything right, or thought I had. I had gotten her out of the city entirely, north an hour up the interstate to a motel off an exit Kessler's men had no reason to know. Cash, no phones, a room at the back. And I sat in that room with Cora safe beside me, and I let myself believe distance had beaten a man whose whole power was a single city. And at 11:40 headlights came up the access road, one car, unhurried, and Renner got out and walked to our door as if he had booked the next room. And when I stood in front of it with a tire iron in my hand, ready for once to make him work for it, he did not even hurry. He looked almost sorry. He told me, in the flat, kind voice of a man explaining the rules to a child, that there was nowhere on the map I could take her, because Mr. Kessler had made this drive before. All of them, every road out of the city, 10,000 times, and there was no motel, and no exit, and no back room, that a man with 30 years and infinite mornings had not already watched me try. He had not followed us. He had simply known, the way you know the ending of a book you have read 1,000 times, and he was here at the last page, because the last page is where he always was. I swung the tire iron. It did not matter. It never mattered. The point was that I finally understood I was not being chased. I was being read. And through all of it, loop after loop, I came to know her, and that was the sweetest and cruelest thing the day ever did to me. Because I met Cora hundreds of times, and every time was the first time for her. I learned that she hummed when she was scared, without knowing she did it. I learned she had a younger brother she sent money to, and a plant she'd kept alive for 6 years, and a laugh she was embarrassed by, a real ugly, wonderful laugh. And I learned how to earn it in the safe stretches of the day before the killing hour, on the loops where I got her somewhere quiet and we had, impossibly, an hour. I learned she had copied those pages knowing what it would probably cost her, because she had found, in the Kessler Foundation's clean accounts, the buried thread of a thing done 30 years ago, a name, a payment, a death, written off as an accident, and she was the kind of person who could not unknow a thing like that and go on stamping invoices. She was brave in the specific way that terrified me, the way that gets people killed, the way that had gotten her killed 10,000 times, and I fell in love with her the way you fall in love with someone you are watching drown, completely and uselessly and with your whole heart. There was one loop I keep folded up somewhere behind my ribs, and I take it out more than is good for me. I had gotten her out early and clean, and instead of running, I did something I had never dared. I bought us the evening. I took her to the top of a cheap parking garage on the south side that has the best view of the river in the city, a thing only a man who has driven every street 10,000 times would know. And I brought food from Sal's and a bad bottle of wine from the biotech money, and I told her the truth, all of it, the loop, the deaths, the fact that I had known her for what felt like years, and she had known me for an hour. And she did not run, and she did not call me insane. Because Cora was the kind of person who could hold an impossible thing and turn it over instead of dropping it. And she looked out at the river and she was quiet for a while. And then she asked me what her laugh sounded like, since I claimed to know it. And I told her. And she laughed, the real one, the ugly, wonderful one she was embarrassed by, because no one had ever told her it was the thing about her I would have crossed 10,000 days to hear, and for a little while, on a concrete roof above a river. Two people who had met an hour ago and 1,000 times sat close in the cold and were, against all the arithmetic of that terrible day. She fell asleep on my shoulder at 11. I did not wake her to run because I had already learned there was no running that worked, and I would rather she spent her last minutes warm and dreaming than afraid. Renner found us at 11:47. He always found us at 11:47. And she woke at the very end, and she was not afraid. She was confused, and she looked at me and said in a small voice, "I feel like I know you." And then the hour did what the hour does. I feel like I know you. It is the closest she ever came in 1,000 tries to remembering, and I have built the rest of my life on those 5 words. She never remembered me. I need you to sit in that with me for a second, because it is the center of everything I felt in those loops. I knew her favorite everything. I knew the shape of her grief and the sound of her laugh and the things she said when she finally trusted me, which was the same beautiful sentence every time, because she was a recording and I was not. And every dawn she was a stranger again, scared, alone, holding her bag, and I was nobody to her. And I loved a woman who fell fresh out of my memory every single morning while I carried all of it, all of her, forward alone. Kessler had told me the loop was a world where you never lose anyone. He was wrong, in the deepest possible way. I lost Cora every night, and found her every morning as a stranger, and lost her again, and there is no grief in the ordinary world that is worse than that, the grief of being the only one who remembers the love. And then I did it. Around the 200th loop, or the 300th, I stopped counting cleanly somewhere in there. I got everything right. I reached her early and gently. I earned her trust. I saw Renner's man on the corner before he saw us. I took a route Kessler had not booked, because I had spent 40 deaths finding the one street his men never covered, and I got Cora past 11:47. Alive. Whole. Sitting beside me in a stolen car on a rooftop parking deck on the west side. At 11:50, breathing, terrified, alive, 3 minutes past the hour that had killed her 10,000 times. And I started to laugh, and she looked at me like I was insane, and I did not care, because I had done the impossible thing. I had beaten the appointment. I had saved her. The day reset at midnight anyway. 6:47. The alarm. The gray light. My whole chest caving in with a grief that had no wound to explain it. Cora, downstairs across the city, alive and scared and doomed, a stranger again, the plant watered, the brother waiting on a transfer that would never send. I had kept her body alive past the killing hour, and the day had ended and reset her anyway. And that was how I learned the last and worst rule of the trap, the one that broke me before it saved me. The loop was not anchored to Cora's life. Keeping her breathing changed nothing. The loop was anchored to the thing on the pages, the buried truth, the crime at 7:30 years ago, that Kessler could not let become real. That was the door. As long as that truth stayed buried, as long as the thing Kessler did stayed unwitnessed and unproven and unsaid, the day would reset forever, no matter who lived to see midnight. Because the whole point of the day, the reason it existed, was to keep that one fact from ever reaching a Wednesday. Saving Cora's life was not enough. It had never been the task. The task was to take the thing Ellis Kessler had spent 30 years and 10,000 murders burying, and drag it into a light he could not switch off, and make it true in a way that survived the dawn. And there was no way to do that. Nothing survived the dawn. Not money, not evidence, not a body, not a confession, nothing but what I carried in my own head, and you cannot convict a king with a memory only one dead driver holds. I sat on the edge of my bed that morning, and I did not get up for a long time. And for the first time since the second death, the cold thing in me that had been growing all this while went quiet, and something else moved in, something I had kept out until then by staying busy, by having a next thing to try. Despair. The real kind. The kind that had been waiting for me at the bottom of the day all along. I stopped counting the deaths somewhere past 400, and I stopped counting the loops entirely. And there was a stretch in the middle of this, a long gray stretch I am not proud of and cannot leave out, where I simply gave up. You cannot understand it unless you have felt every death. That is the thing the loop does, that no one warns you about. Kessler had turned dying into paperwork. For me, it was never paperwork. Every drowning filled my real lungs. Every fall, my stomach really left me. Every one of Renner's bullets went into a body that felt it completely, and a mind that remembered it forever. And I was carrying, by then, the sensory memory of hundreds of my own murders, folded up inside a man who still had to get up at 6:47 and be charming to a barista and order the meatloaf and do it all again. There is a weight to that which is not metaphor. I could feel myself thinning under it, like a coat worn through at the elbows, and one morning, I woke up and could not make the coffee and could not think of a single reason to try the day at all. So I took Kessler's deal without telling him I had taken it. I stopped trying to save Cora. I told myself it was mercy, that I was only sparing myself the 1,000th time of watching her die. But that was a lie, and I knew it was a lie. I stopped because it was easier, and easier is a country you can disappear into. I lived the day for myself. I had the biotech money by 10 and the penthouse dinner by 8, and I ate like a king and I drank like a man trying to drown something that could not drown. And I let 11:47 come and I let Cora die across the city with a stranger's face turned up to Renner's gun, and I did not go, and I did nothing. And at midnight the day wiped it clean and gave her back to me alive at dawn so I could not save her all over again. I did that for more loops than I will ever say out loud. I told myself she was fine. She was alive every morning, wasn't she? That was Kessler's exact poison, and I drank it down and called it peace. There was a night in that gray country I have never told and will tell once, here and then put away. I went back up to the tower. I told myself I was going to spy, to learn, but that was a lie too. I went because I was lonely in the exact way Kessler was lonely, and he was the only other person alive who remembered anything, and misery goes looking for the only company that speaks its language. He poured the drink. He did not gloat. He saw it on me at once, the thing he had been waiting 30 years for, a man who had stopped fighting, and he was gentle with me the way you are gentle with someone finally coming around. And he told me I could have a suite, a life, a purpose, that between us we could run the day like a garden, and God help me. I sat in that chair, and for the length of one drink I let myself want it. A world with no more dying, Cora alive downstairs forever, never losing anyone again. I was so tired. And then he said the thing that saved me, though he meant it as the sweetest part of the offer. He said, in time you'll even stop thinking about her. That's the mercy of it. Give it a few years and you won't remember why the girl with the bag ever mattered. And I looked at the most powerful man in the world, offering me the one thing I wanted. And I understood that the price of it was becoming a man who could forget Cora's laugh on purpose, and that Kessler had already paid that price 30 years ago. And that was why his eyes were what they were. I put the drink down. I did not say no that night. I just left. But I left knowing. It was not peace, what I had. It was the slow becoming of Ellis Kessler, and I could feel it happening, could feel the thing in me that had loved a woman's ugly laugh going quiet and hard, could feel myself starting to look at the people in the day the way he looked at them, as furniture, as recordings, as weather, and the horror of that was so gradual that I almost did morning I caught myself at Sal's counter, myself at Sal's counter, not ordering the meatloaf, not asking about his wife, sitting there with my expensive nothing of a life, letting an old man take a bad call alone, with his back to the room, because it did not matter, because none of it stuck, Because why give a stranger 5 minutes of remembering her happy when the dawn would eat it anyway? And I heard Kessler in my own head saying nothing sticks. And I understood that I had lost the argument. Not to him, to myself. I had let the day convince me that a kindness that isn't remembered didn't happen, and that was the exact lie the whole loop was built to sell. And Sal's grief was sitting 3 feet away from me being real whether the dawn kept it or not, and I had been about to let it go. I ordered the meatloaf. I asked him about the girl he met at the dance. His face did the thing it always did, and it was the most beautiful thing I had seen in 100 loops, and I sat there and let an old man be happy for 5 minutes he would not keep. And I wept quietly into a plate of bad meatloaf in a diner that would forget me by morning, because I had almost thrown away the one true thing the day had ever taught me. It still happened. The wine on the rooftop still happened. The thank you still happened. I feel like I know you still happened. Every kindness I had ever given a person who would not remember it had happened, was still happening. Would always have happened, in the only ledger that a man carries out of any day, which is the one written on the inside of himself. Kessler had lived 30 years telling himself that ledger was empty because the world's copy got wiped every dawn. He had gotten it exactly backwards. The world's copy never mattered. The only copy that ever mattered was the one he had spent 30 years refusing to write. That was the morning I came back. And when I came back different, because the despair had burned something out of me and left the cold thing standing alone, clear at last, and the cold thing finally asked the right question. I had been trying to beat Ellis Kessler at his own game. That was my whole mistake, laid bare. I had been out-planning him, out-hiding, out-running, out-surveilling, spending deaths to buy facts, trying to find the one perfect route through the day that he had not already walked. And I was losing, and I would always lose, because it was his game. He had 30 years and I had one. On the board of Who Can Master a Repeating Day, he was a god and I was a child, and no amount of my dying was ever going to close 30 years of his living. So I would stop playing his game. I would find the one move that was not on his board at all. And I already knew, if I was honest, where to look for it, because he had told me himself, in that beautiful room, without knowing what he was handing me. He had watched a handful of others wake to the loop over the decades, a nurse, a detective, a boy, and every one of them had broken against it, and every one of them had, in the end, either joined him or died out of the day forever. And the reason all of them lost was that all of them had done exactly what I had done. They had tried to win. They had tried to master the day, to escape it, to survive it, to beat him. And a man defending a thing he has perfected over 30 years cannot be beaten at defending it. But in 30 years and 10,000 mornings, with everything he had, Ellis Kessler had never once done the only thing that could actually end the day. He had never chosen to lose it. He had never taken the one action that opened the far door, because the far door led to the Wednesday where he answered for what he did, and every instinct he had, every reflex 30 years deep, existed to keep that door shut. His mastery was total, and it was also a cage of his own design, and there was one whole category of move he could not make, could not even see, because making it was the one thing his entire deathless existence was built to prevent. He could not do something that cost him everything to save someone else. He had never learned how. He had spent 30 years unlearning it on purpose. And I, a nobody who had died 400 times and had nothing left to protect, had been relearning it, one meatloaf, one rooftop, one thank you at a time, without even knowing that it was the only weapon in the world that could kill a king who could not be outthought. I went to find Cora that night, not to save her, not yet. I had no plan yet, only to sit near her and remember why. I reached her early and I did not tell her the impossible things. I just rode with her a while as a driver, and she talked, the way scared people talk, to fill a silence, about her brother, about the plant, about how she knew what she'd found would probably cost her, but that some things you cannot unsee and go on being a person you can stand. She said, not knowing she was handing me the whole rest of my life, that she'd rather be gone having told the truth once than safe having swallowed it forever. She said it about the pages. She did not know she was saying it about the loop, about Kessler, about the choice between a deathless silence and a single honest Wednesday. But I heard it. I heard her say the exact thing Kessler could not say, The thing 30 years had burned out of him, from the back seat of a 9-year-old car, a junior accountant with a canvas bag who had already, without a shred of my memory, or my time, or my 100 deaths, solved the entire problem. Rather gone having told it once than safe having swallowed it forever. That was the move. She had been holding it the whole time. I did not know yet exactly how I would spend it, the shape of the last day, the timing, the sequence of small, impossible things it would take. But I knew its heart now, and its heart was the opposite of everything Kessler was. Not a way to win the day, a way to end it. Not survival, testimony. And I knew who it would cost. It would cost me. That was the whole point. That was why, after 30 years of seeing every move on the board, he would never see this one coming. Because it was the one move he had spent his entire deathless life, proving to himself that no sane man would ever make. A plan is easy to want and hard to build, and mine had a problem at the center of it that had killed every version of me who tried to solve it head on. Nothing survives the dawn. I could get the pages. I had gotten them 100 times. But paper resets. I could film Kessler's own men confessing, and did, and the footage was gone at 6:47 with everything else. I could write the whole truth in blood on the wall of the police commissioner's office, and it would be clean paint by morning. And the commissioner would not remember reading it, because the commissioner was a leaf on the branch, same as everyone, resetting, forgetting, surprised by the same sunrise forever. The only thing in the entire universe that carried a single fact from one loop to the next was the inside of my own head, and you cannot end a 30-year murder with the uncorroborated memory of one dead rideshare driver. So I stopped trying to make the truth survive the dawn, and I asked a different question, the question that finally cracked it. Why did the dawn come at all? The dawn came because Kessler would not let the day end. And the day would not end because 30 years ago, at 11:47 p.m., a truth was supposed to come out and did not, because he stopped it, because he killed the person about to tell it, and rather than live in the world where that truth was loose, he froze the world in the last moment before it. That was the anchor. Not Cora's body, not the pages themselves. The moment. 11:47 was not just when Cora died. It was the exact minute, 30 years running, when the truth was always about to surface and was always, at the last second, buried again. The day was a wound that had never been allowed to close because closing it meant letting the infection out first, which meant the loop did not need me to make a truth that survived the reset. It needed me to make the truth surface at 11:47, in the one moment the whole loop existed to prevent, so completely and so publicly that burying it was no longer possible, so that the wound could finally close and the day could do the thing it had been forbidden to do for 30 years, which was simply to become tomorrow. I did not have to beat the reset. I had to make the reset unnecessary. I had to give the day its true ending, the one Kessler had stolen from it, and hand it back. And once I understood that, I understood what I actually had, which was more than I had ever let myself count. I had a witness who found the truth on her own, every single loop without any help from me. A woman whose entire brave, stubborn nature was to dig up the buried thing and refuse to swallow it. Cora, resetting every dawn not as a liability but as the one perfect renewable resource in that whole terrible machine. A truth teller who could not be permanently silenced because she came back every morning ready to find it all over again. I had my own memory, 30 years worth of knowledge, crammed into a mind that carried across the dawn. And I had the one weapon Kessler could not hold, could not even look at directly, the willingness to spend my own life to close the wound, because he had spent 30 years proving to himself that no one would. The shape of it came together slowly, over more loops than I can count, and I will not walk you through every failed rehearsal, though there were hundreds. The heart of it was this. At 11:47, at the anchor, in the one moment the loop was built to protect, I would put the truth in front of the whole city at once. In Cora's own voice, in a place and a way that could not be shot or bought or buried in the 90 seconds Kessler's machine was built to buy. And I would do it knowing it would cost me the last thing I had left to spend. There was a live broadcast that night. There always was. It was one of the fixed stars of that Tuesday, the Kessler Foundation's annual gala, carried live on 3 stations from the grand hall on the ground floor of his own tower. The great man's great night, the philanthropist crowned again by the city he secretly owned. 10,000 loops he had stood at that podium at 1:45 and given the same gracious speech to the same adoring cameras, while 40 blocks away his men tidied a driver and a girl off a wet street so the morning could reset clean. He had never once imagined the two halves of his night in the same frame, because in 30 years, no one had ever been able to bring them together. The murder happened in the dark on the east side. The speech happened in the light at the center. They were his two perfect secrets, and they never touched. I was going to make them touch. At 11:47, while Ellis Kessler stood at his own podium in front of his own live cameras and the whole watching city, Cora was going to walk into that light with the pages and say, in her own voice on 3 stations, what he had done 30 years ago and what he had done every night since, and I was going to buy her the 90 seconds to finish saying it. With the only currency, Kessler's machine had never learned to refuse. Assembling the pieces took everything I had learned in 400 deaths. I needed Cora not at the river but at the tower, walking toward the man who killed her instead of away from him, which meant I had to reach her earlier than I ever had and turn her whole night around in the space of a car ride, and earn, in minutes, the kind of trust that normally takes a life. I had one thing that made it possible. I knew her. I knew the exact fact about her own found truth that would make her believe a stranger who shouldn't know it, the buried name on the pages that she had told no one, and when I said that name to her cold, in the first 60 seconds, her whole face would change, and she would listen, every time, because you trust the man who already knows your secret. I mapped the building from 10,000 of Kessler's own movements, the service corridor behind the stage, that his security never watched during the speech because, in 30 years, no one had ever used it. The 90-second window between the last camera check and the podium, the single unlocked door, a caterer always propped for a smoke. I learned the gala's clockwork the way I had once learned a horse race, down to the minute the applause would swell, loud enough to cover a scuffle. And I learned Renner's night from the other side, the timing that sent him east to the river, so that on the one night I did not run east, the machine's best hand would be 40 blocks away, tidying a driver and a girl who, for the first time in 30 years, would not be there. I tested pieces of it. That was the mistake I could only make once. There was a loop where I walked the service corridor at 11:40 just to time it, nothing more, and I felt it the moment I stepped through the propped door, the wrongness of being somewhere the day had never the podium, 40 feet away through the wall. Ellis Kessler paused in a speech he had given 10,000 times, paused in the exact quarter inch toward he never paused, and heard a note in toward the belong, as if he had heard a note in the music that did not belong. He did not know what I was doing, but he knew, the way he knew everything, that something was moving in his perfect day that he had not placed there, and that night Renner did not go east at all. That night Renner came for me at the tower, early, and I understood that I had just taught my enemy exactly where to look. I could not walk the plan even once without walking it into his hands. The only version of it that could work was a version I had never run, executed for the first and only time on the last day, cold, unrehearsed, with a woman who did not know me and a sequence I had built entirely in my head and never once let touch the board he could read. The problem, the last problem, the one that took me longest, was that Kessler remembered too. Any plan I rehearsed, any route I walked twice, any move I made that had a pattern, he would read the way he read everything, and the more perfectly I built the sequence, the more surely he would see it coming. Because a perfect plan is a repeatable plan, and repeatable was the one thing he could always beat. I could not out-rehearse a man with 30 years of rehearsal, so the plan could not be perfect. It had to be, at its core, a thing he could not model, and there is only one kind of act that a man who has seen 10,000 versions of every selfish choice cannot predict, and that is a genuinely selfless one, made fresh, in the moment, at a cost the planner has not pre-counted because he would never pay it himself. I could not show Kessler a clever man threading his day. I had to show him something he had literally never seen in 30 years, of watching people wake into the loop and try to win it. I had to show him a man throwing his one irreplaceable life onto the fire, not to escape the day, but to end it for everyone, including the woman who would never remember he had done it. He would not see that coming, because in 30 years he had unlearned that it was even a thing a person could do. His mastery was total, and his blindness was total in the exact same place, and they were the same thing. And that was the crack in the wall I had been looking for since the second death. The hardest piece was the one I could not touch, and it was Cora herself. Everything else I could learn, walk time, memorize. But the plan lived or died on 90 seconds at a lit podium that only she could stand in, and I could not be beside her when she stood there, because being beside her was being between her and Renner somewhere else. She would have to say it alone. A woman who would meet me for the first time 40 minutes before the end, who would have no memory of trusting me, who I would have to convince, cold, in a car, to walk toward the man who wanted her dead and speak into the brightest lights in the city while her whole body screamed to run for the dark. I could not rehearse that with her because she reset. I could only learn across many quiet loops the exact sequence of true things that would take a terrified stranger from, please just drive to all right in the time it takes to cross a few blocks. And I built that sequence the way a locksmith files a key, one tiny cut at a time, tested against the one lock in the world I most needed to open and least wanted to force. The buried name first, to make her believe. Then the truth about the river, to make her afraid of the right thing. Then the one offer no one had ever made her, that her death did not have to be a secret in the dark, that it could be a truth in the light, that she could choose, for once, where the worst thing that ever happened to her happened. I learned that Cora, given that choice, took it every single time, because she was, at the root of her, a person who would rather be seen telling the truth than safe keeping it, and that was not something I taught her, it was something I found in her, already there, every dawn, waiting. I spent my last quiet loops getting ready, not rehearsing the run, which could not be rehearsed, but getting the words for Cora exactly right, and telling Sal about the girl at the dance one more time, and watching Priya's whole face change one more time, and sitting at the top of the parking garage above the river alone, where a version of this whole terrible day had once been briefly, impossibly happy, and saying my goodbyes to a Tuesday that had killed me 400 times and taught me, in the end, the one thing my small safe life never would have. Then I woke at 6:47, and I did not reach for the coffee, and I lay in the gray light and let myself feel, all the way down, that this was the last first time. One way or the other, whatever the far door opened onto, I was not going to see 6:47 again. It was, I realized the first morning, in longer than I could remember, that I was not afraid to die. Because for the first time, if I died right, I would stay dead, and the day would finally, mercifully, become tomorrow. I did not touch the market that last morning. I did not go near Doyle or the horse or the biotech ticker or any of the small certainties I had spent so many days harvesting. Because every one of them was a groove, Kessler could feel me running, and on the last day I wanted to be a blank space in his perfect record, a man doing nothing he had ever seen me do. I spent the daylight hours saying goodbye to a Tuesday. I drove Priya's route just to tell her about the second round of acceptances one final time. I ordered the meatloaf at Sal's and asked about the dance, and I let the old man be happy, and I did not weep this time, I just held it. And then the light went down over the city the way it did every day, on schedule, indifferent, and I went to find Cora at the beginning of the worst and last 90 minutes of both our lives. I reached her at 10:50, on the street outside her building, before she ran. Before the pages were even in the bag, earlier than I had ever reached her, and I did the thing I had built 400 deaths to be able to do. I said the buried name. I said it flat and quiet, the name off the 30-year-old page that she had found that afternoon and told no living soul, and I watched a scared woman go still, and I watched her decide, in the space of one held breath, that a stranger who knew the one thing she had told no one was a stranger worth 90 seconds. It is the only con I have ever run that I am proud of, because everything I told her after the name was true. I told her they would kill her at 11:07 by the river if she ran the way her fear was already telling her to run. I told her there was one way the truth lived, and it was not the river, and it was not the phone call no one would answer. It was the light, his light, the cameras he could not shoot out, at the 1 minute he would give anything to keep her out of. I told her I had watched her be brave more times than she would believe, and that I needed her to be brave in a new direction, toward the tower instead of away from it, toward the man instead of the dark. And Cora, who had already decided that afternoon that she would rather be gone having told the truth, then safe having swallowed it, looked at me. This stranger who wept a little while he talked and said, "All right." Just like that. All right. The bravest word in the language, and she spent it on me, and she never knew she had said it 100 times before. Kessler felt it within the hour. I know because the day started coming apart in ways I had never seen, and a day only surprises a man who has run it 10,000 times when someone is finally doing something new. The gala's clockwork jittered. Renner did not go east. There was no one east to go to, no driver, no girl on the river road, and a machine built for 30 years to tidy the same corner found the corner empty and turned, blind for the first time, to hunt. Kessler's security doubled on doors that had never needed watching. And at 11:15, my phone rang, a phone with a number I had never given him, and I answered it walking Cora through a parking structure toward the tower, and Ellis Kessler's calm old voice said, "You found a move." He did not sound angry. He sounded, for the first time, interested, the way a grandmaster is interested when a child he has been beating for an hour suddenly plays something off the book. "Tell me what it is," he said, "and I'll let you keep her. I have kept her 10,000 times. I can keep her tomorrow, too." And I said the only thing worth saying, which was that keeping her was the whole crime, that a woman kept alive in a cage she has to die in every night is not saved, she is imprisoned, and that I was not going to keep Cora, I was going to free her, even into a world where she got to die once and stay dead, because dying once in a true Wednesday was more mercy than he had shown her in 30 years of dawns. He was quiet a moment. Then he said gently, "You understand I cannot let you," and I said I know, and we both hung up, two men who had run out of things to say, and the last hour began in earnest. He threw the whole machine at us, and the machine was the city. Doors that opened every loop were locked. The prop caterer's door, my one unclean way into the service corridor, had a man standing in front of it who had never been there in 10,000 nights. Renner, redirected, was somewhere in the tower now, hunting, early and off his leash, and I had no map for a Renner who was improvising, because in 400 deaths I had never seen him have to. Everything I knew, Kessler had just unknown, changing his own perfect day on the fly to close the one crack in it, and for a few terrible minutes in those corridors, I thought I had lost, thought I had spent 400 deaths and a woman's trust to walk us both into a trap he had simply rebuilt around us. There was a moment in a stairwell at 11:31 that I will carry into whatever comes after this. Renner found us on the landing, and there was nowhere to go, and I did the arithmetic I had done 400 times and had never once been able to do until that night, because until that night my death had only ever meant breakfast. Now it meant the plan. If I died here at 11:31, 16 minutes early, the day would not reset. It would simply go on without me, and Cora would be alone in a tower full of Kessler's men with no one who knew the route. So for the first time in 400 deaths I could not afford to die, and that, I discovered, is a far more frightening way to face a man with a gun than knowing you'll wake up at 6:47. I did not fight Renner. I had never been able to beat Renner. What I did was spend the one thing I had that he did not, which was that I knew this stairwell, every loop of it, and he was improvising, and I took Cora through a maintenance door that I knew jammed halfway and looked like a dead end and was not, and I let him follow us into it, and I let the jammed door do to his shoulder what it had done to mine on a loop long ago. And we were through and gone, while a professional who had killed me 100 times swore in the dark behind a door that only a man who had died against it would have known to use. I did not beat him. You do not beat a man like Renner. But 400 deaths had made me the world's leading expert on this exact building at this exact hour, and expertise, it turns out, is just a nice word for suffering you have survived and remembered, and I had suffered this tower into my bones. But here is the thing about a man improvising for the first time in 30 years. He is bad at it. Kessler had not made a genuinely new decision since before I was born. He had only ever chosen among moves he had already tested to death, and now, forced to invent, forced to react to a day he could not predict, he was doing the thing I had done on my very first loops, stumbling, overcovering the obvious, leaving the strange gaps that only a person thinking fresh leaves. He locked the doors I had used before, and left unlocked the one I never had, because he was defending against the plan he'd read, and my plan had never been on the board. At 11:38, I got Cora into the freight elevator behind the kitchens, a route I had found in my head and never once walked, and rode it up toward the mezzanine above the grand hall, toward the light, while 40 floors of Ellis Kessler's improvised panic guarded all the wrong doors. And I felt, for the first time since the second death, the day bend a direction it had never bent. Cora did not break the whole way up, and I need that on the record too. She was terrified. She was running through the guts of a building toward the man who wanted her dead, on the word of a stranger, who wept and knew her secrets, and she did not stop and she did not doubt out loud, even once, and somewhere on the freight elevator, in the shaking dark, she asked me the only question she had time for. She asked why I was crying, if this was going to work. And I told her the truth, because I had promised myself the last day would be all truth. I told her that, if it worked, she would live and reach tomorrow, and never remember me, and that I would not be there to see it, and that both of those things were the same thing, and it was the best trade I had ever been offered. She did not understand. She could not have. But she reached over in the dark and held my hand, this woman who had known me for 40 minutes and 100 lifetimes. And she did not let go until the doors opened. And if you want to know what 400 deaths buys a man, it was that. It bought me her hand in the dark for the length of a freight elevator, once, for real, and I would pay it all again for less. We came out onto the mezzanine at 11:43. Below us, in a blaze of light and crystal and 3 network cameras, Ellis Kessler was walking to his podium to give the same gracious speech he had given 10,000 times, the great man, the philanthropist, the secret king of a city that would never know what he was, and 40 feet away and 1 floor up, in the dark behind the rigging, stood a scared woman with the truth in a canvas bag and a dead man who loved her and had 4 minutes left to spend. And across the hall, stepping out of a stairwell with his coat open and his unhurried walk, finally, for once, hurried, Renner saw us. 11:44. The applause began to build the way I knew it would, the only thing left in that whole night, still running on the rails I had learned. Cora looked at me. I looked at the podium and the cameras and the microphone that fed 3 stations and 9 million people, and the 1 minute the entire loop existed to protect. 90 seconds. That was all I had to buy her. I had died 400 times learning how much a life is worth. It turns out it is worth exactly 90 seconds if you spend it right. At 11:45, I gave Cora the last thing I had that mattered, which was a plan she could run without me. And then I went to spend the last thing I had that didn't, which was the rest of my life. The route to the podium ran along the mezzanine and down a short flight of open stairs, into the light, into the cameras, into the 90 seconds. Renner and 2 others were coming up through the hall to cut it off. Kessler, at his podium, had seen us now, had seen the woman in the dark above him with the canvas bag, and I watched 30 years of perfect composure hold, because he was too practiced to let a room of cameras see him falter, and that composure was the last card I needed him to keep playing. He could not stop this loudly. Not here. Not with 3 networks live on his face. Whatever he did to bury Cora in the next 90 seconds, he had to do it quietly, or do it on camera, and I had built the entire last day around forcing him to choose between those 2, because both of them were the truth coming out. I sent Cora down the stairs into the light, and I went the other way, into Renner. I want to tell you it was a great fight. It was not. I have never been able to beat Renner, and I did not beat him then. What I did was be in his way, completely, with everything I had, a soft man who had died 400 times and had finally found a death worth something, and I put my whole self between a professional and the stairs, and I made him spend seconds on me, seconds he did not have, because down in the light a woman was already at the microphone. He put the first shot through me at 11:46, and it did not stop me because I had felt that exact shot 100 times, and I knew now, and I used every second of that knowledge to fall the right way, to foul his fun is taking, to take the second man down the stairs with me, in a tangle of bodies that blocked the one clean path to Cora for 4 more seconds. And 4 seconds, it turns out, is the difference between a truth buried and a truth loose in the world forever. Because at 11:47, at the anchor, at the 1 minute in 30 years the whole loop existed to protect, Cora reached the microphone. I saw it happen sideways, through blood, from the stairs, and I have replayed it more than I have replayed my own deaths. She was small in that blaze of light. a junior accountant in a plain coat who had run 1,000 times toward a dark river and died there every night, and this last once, she had run the other way, into the brightest room in the city, and she stepped up beside a startled billionaire at his own podium, and she did not shake. She put the pages down on the lectern, under the lights where the cameras could hold them, and she leaned into a microphone that fed 3 networks and 9 million people, and Ellis Kessler, who had 10,000 years of practice at making problems disappear quietly, made the one mistake his frozen genius had left him incapable of not making. He reached for her, on camera, in the light. 30 years of never having to do it in public had left him with no move for public, and his hand closed on Cora's arm in front of the whole watching city, the philanthropist, the great man, grabbing at a terrified young woman at his own gala, and every camera in the room turned toward it the way cameras do. And that was the confession before she even finished the sentence. Then she finished the sentence. She said his name, and she said what he had done 30 years ago at this exact minute to a person whose death he had bought and written off, and what he had done every night since to keep it buried. And she held up the pages into the light, and it went out, all of it, unshootable, unbuyable, unburyable. A truth surfacing at the precise moment it had been drowned 10,000 times. His men froze, because there is no quiet way to silence a woman at a lit podium on 3 networks, and by the time anyone in that machine understood that the rules had changed, the words were already loose in 9 million homes, and you cannot reset 9 million homes. I felt it happen from where I lay bleeding on the stairs. I felt the day change. I cannot describe it better than that. Something that had been clenched for 30 years let go. A held breath finally released. The wound, open and infected since before I was born, finally cleanly closed. Ellis Kessler stood at his own podium, city's worth of people to walk out of his own mouthpiece into the light, and for the first time in 30 years, he was a man who could not run the day again to fix it, because I could see it on his face, the dawning horror of a man realizing the reset was not coming, that this time the words would still be true in the morning, that there would, for the first time in 3 decades, be a morning, Al. Be a morning at all. He had bolted the far door to stay king forever, and a nobody and a girl with a bag had opened it while he stood there in the light, unable to stop them without confessing, and through it came the one thing he had frozen the world to keep out. Tomorrow. Renner's last shot found me at 11:52, on the stairs, the way it always did, at the time it always did, and I let it, because the appointment did not matter anymore, because the day it was written in was already ending. I lay there in the light spilling up from the hall, and I heard chaos, cameras screaming, the specific sound of a kingdom coming apart, and I heard, somewhere in it, Cora's voice still going, still telling it, brave to the last the way she had been brave 10,000 times when no one could remember, and I thought, with what I was sure were my final seconds, that I had done it. I had bought her the 90 seconds. I had opened the door. She would reach Wednesday. She would live one real day, and then another, and grow old, and answer for nothing but her own good heart, and she would never remember the man on the stairs. And that was all right. That was the trade. That was the best offer I had ever been given. The clock in the grand hall reached midnight, and for the first time in 30 years, it kept going. There was no gray light. There was no 6:47. There was no cheap ascending chime, and no radiator smell, and no $71 in checking. There was a hospital ceiling, 4 days later, and a machine counting my heartbeat, and a window with actual weather moving behind it. Thursday weather, real weather, weather that had never once existed in the whole endless Tuesday, because Tuesday had never been allowed to become the day after itself. I had not planned to survive. I want to be honest about that, because it is the strangest part, and I have never fully understood it. I spent my life on those stairs, and I meant to. But a day held frozen for 30 years is a day holding a great deal that should have moved on. 30 years of unspooled mornings, 30 years of deaths that never stuck, and when the wound finally closed, when the day finally moved, it seems it gave back some of what it had been clenching, the way a fist opening drops what it held. Renner's bullet was real. But the day that required my death had ended, and a day that has ended cannot collect. I woke into Thursday with 3 scars I will carry to a real grave someday, an old-fashioned mortal grave I will only visit once, and I have never been so grateful for anything as I am for the plain fact that I can die now, once, like everyone, at the end of a life that moves. Kessler did not get a hospital. The 30 years he had refused caught up with him all at once, the way a held breath does when it finally breaks, and by the time the city's real Wednesday was over, the truth Cora put in the light had done to him what no court alone could have, unspooled his whole frozen empire, every buried thing surfacing at once now that the day would no longer swallow them by dawn. I will not pretend it was clean justice. It was messier and slower than that, the way the real world is. But he was finished, and he knew he was finished, and the last I heard of Ellis Kessler, he was a very old man in a very small room learning, 30 years too late, what it costs to live in a day that ends, which is the only thing that was ever wrong with him, and the only sentence that could ever have fit the crime. Cora lived. Cora is living still, out there in a string of ordinary days that arrive one after another and do not repeat, growing older, sending money to a brother, keeping a plant alive, laughing the ugly, wonderful laugh she is embarrassed by. She does not remember the loops. She does not remember the river, or the motel, or the rooftop above the water, or 1,000 versions of a stranger who loved her before she ever said hello. There is a mercy in that, and there is a grief, and I have made my peace with holding both. But I will tell you the thing I have never told anyone, the thing I keep folded behind my ribs with the rooftop and the thank you. We met again in Thursday in the real world, the way strangers meet, at the trial, and then after it, slowly, the ordinary way, two people with no history and all the time in the world. And on the second afternoon we ever really spent, the first one that was allowed to lead to a third, she stopped in the middle of a sentence and looked at me, this woman who had known me for 2 weeks and 100 lifetimes, and something moved behind her eyes that I had spent 400 deaths learning to hope for. And she said quietly, almost to herself, I feel like I know you. And this time, there was a tomorrow to find out in. A day is a room with 2 doors. He locked the far one to stay king forever, and he called it mercy, and he was the loneliest man who ever lived. I died 400 times reaching for the handle, and what I learned on the far side of it is the plainest thing there is and the only thing worth dying to keep. A life that happens once and then is gone is not the tragedy. It is the whole of what makes a single ordinary Thursday, or an ugly wonderful laugh, or the words I feel like I know you, mean anything at all. I have thought a great deal in the real years since about what actually broke the day, because it was not the pages, and it was not the cameras, and it was not even the truth exactly. Kessler had buried truths before. What he had never faced, in 30 years of running the most rehearsed day in history, was a person who would spend everything and gain nothing, act freely against his own survival for someone who would never know or repay it. And the reason the day could not model me is the same reason his whole frozen kingdom could not survive Wednesday. A world where nothing sticks is a world you can only rule if no one is willing to lose. He had built a perfect machine out of people's self-interest, their fear, their reasonable refusal to throw a life away, and it ran flawlessly for 30 years, because self-interest is the most predictable thing on earth. And then a nobody with nothing left decided that a stranger's one real death was worth more than his own endless mornings, and the machine had no gear for it, because the man who built it had spent 30 years proving to himself that such a person does not exist. He was almost right. Most days, in most people, he was right. It only takes being wrong once. I don't know why the day chose me, a nobody with $70 and a 9-year-old car. Maybe it did not choose me at all. Maybe it only ever needed one person, anywhere, in its endless morning, willing to open the far door, knowing what waited on the other side, and I was simply the 412th to wake up inside it, and the first who was tired enough, or broke enough, or in love enough, to stop trying to win it and start trying to end it. I don't know if it can happen again, to someone else, in some other frozen morning, in some other city, and some nights I lie awake in my real, mortal, moving life and wonder whether there are other rooms, other locked far doors, other patient kings waiting out the consequence in the last light before a Wednesday that never comes. But that is a question for a day that has not arrived yet, and I have all my tomorrows now, every last uncertain, unrepeatable, precious one. I intend to spend them like a man who knows exactly what they cost.